Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are continuing with the revision module of on lesson breathing and respiration. Last class we have discussed about the breathing process, the types of respiration, then pulmonary capacities. Today we are going to discuss about the physiology of respiration. So respiration is the exchange of gases by the process of diffusion. For diffusion to take place, we need a respiratory surface with maximum surface area, and it should be bound by a very thin membrane, and that membrane should be covered by highly vascular blood vessels. Then within that, between this membrane or on either side of the membrane, there must be gradient, okay, the partial pressure gradient or the pressure difference must exist. Then the last point, permeability of respiratory gases. So all these are the minimum requirements for a particular organ to be called as the ideal respiratory organ. In human beings, the lungs, which consists of alveolus, which is acting as the main region where the exchange of gases taking place. So here the pressure gradient should exist. So when we look into this figure, atmospheric air, both oxygen and carbon dioxide will be present. The partial pressure of oxygen. So what do you mean by partial pressure? The pressure exerted by a particular gas on a mixture of gases is called as partial pressure. So here partial pressure of oxygen means the oxygen will exert a kind of pressure on the remaining mixture of gases such as carbon dioxide, nitrogen and any other gases. So here in air, in atmospheric air, the partial pressure of oxygen is around 159 millimeters of mercury. And in the alveolus, the partial pressure of oxygen is only 104 millimeters of mercury. So when a person is breathing in, the pressure gradient exists. Outside more amount of oxygen, and inside the lungs, the partial pressure outside it is 159 and here it is 102. So oxygen will rush in to the lungs, and once it reaches into the lungs, the lung or the alveolus, which will be covered by capillaries, very high amount of capillaries will be there, and where there is more oxygen, that is inside the alveolus 104, and inside the capillaries, that is the blood vessels, these are the blood vessels, inside that the partial pressure of oxygen is only 95 millimeters of mercury. So 104 to the capillaries, that means the blood vessels, that is small capillaries will join as the artery, as the vein, that is pulmonary vein, and there oxygenation will take place from the lungs to the blood through the alveolar membrane. The exchange of gases will take place. So oxygen rich air, the oxygen will enter into the pulmonary vein. So here then the partial pressure is only 95. Here it is 104, here it is 95. Then that blood will be carried into the left atrium, then into the left ventricle, from the left ventricle through the aorta. It will pass on. And when it reaches different organ systems are made up of many tissues. So inside the tissues, the partial pressure of oxygen is very, very less. From 95, from the artery to the tissues, to the cells, the oxygen will be exchanged, because here it is 95, here it is only 40. And what for this oxygen is to be exchanged? that is for breaking the glucose in the presence of oxygen, and as a result carbon dioxide, water and energy will be produced. So the carbon dioxide here, which is formed as a result of cellular respiration, is a waste. So because of that, more and more carbon dioxide is forming as a result of cellular respiration. Inside the same tissue itself, the carbon dioxide partial pressure will keep on increasing. So here the carbon dioxide is 45 millimeters of mercury in the tissues, whereas in the blood vessels surrounding, that means the veins are given, it is veins, it is approximately bluish color because oxygen is less. We have marked it as bluish in color, that indicates the oxygen already it is given, so the less amount of oxygen carrying blood along with more amount of carbon dioxide. Why the carbon dioxide is shifting into this? Here the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 45, which is formed as a result of cellular respiration, and certain amount of carbon dioxide will be passed on to the blood vessels. So this will become deoxygenated. So by the time the artery will divide into capillaries, exchange of gases will take place and it will join as the vein. So the vein will carry more amount of carbon dioxide. So from 45 to 40 the diffusion will take place. And from here the vein will carry from all region, the carbon dioxide will be carried and then to the heart, and from the heart to the pulmonary artery. So when it is reaching to the pulmonary artery, again the carbon dioxide concentration, because from different parts of the body the more and more carbon dioxide will be collected. When it reaches somewhere around the alveolus, the pulmonary artery will divide into capillary. When it reaches the capillary, the carbon dioxide concentration again it will increase, that is 40 to 45, because from here all the carbon dioxide will be collected. So the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in this one it will be 45. Then from here in the lungs, when we reach there in the lungs, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is only 40. So here from 45 to 40 it will pass on. And when we breathe out, atmospheric air contain only 0.033% of carbon dioxide. Here it is more. So here it is more amount of carbon dioxide, and atmosphere it is less amount of carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide rich air will go out of the from the lungs to atmosphere. So this is the process where the respiratory exchange is taking place. So here two places the exchange is taking place. One is between the alveolus and the blood vessels, and the other exchange is between the blood vessels and the tissues or capillaries, blood vessel only, which will divide into minute branches, that is called as capillary. So from here the blood vessels to the tissues, and these two exchanges by the process of respiration. So this you have to explain it, the physiology of respiration by diffusion through diffusion membrane, that is here the respiratory membrane is formed of alveolar membrane, basement membrane, and then endothelium of capillary walls. Through that it will be, so the thickness will be very less, it will be less than 0.1 micron. So we will continue to the next topic, that is, this is a table that shows. So here I have given some extra labels and all. So here atmospheric air, the partial pressure of oxygen is 159, and in the lungs it is only 104, so oxygen will diffuse in, and in the capillaries it is only 40, so again the oxygen will diffuse in, and from there more and more, here it is to the artery only, okay, 95, and then from artery, when it reaches the tissues, again as a result of it will exchange. Here the cellular respiration will take place, oxygen will be utilized for the glucose, and as a result carbon dioxide will be formed. So inside the tissues the carbon dioxide percentage will be more, and from there to the capillary. Within the capillary it is only 40, but from here it will move on as it collected from the different parts. When it reaches the capillary around the alveolus, surrounding the alveolus, it will become 40. Then from the lungs to outside to the atmospheric air, that is carbon dioxide. So this is the movement of oxygen, means here it is exchange of carbon dioxide. That is the same only I have represented here also. you can refer the textbook and this part also. It will be more clear if you are revising, learning this table. Now we'll move on to the transport of oxygen. How this oxygen and carbon dioxide is being transported. So first, oxygen by only two methods. That is, first it is in the form of, it is combined form. That is, the oxygen will combine with the hemoglobin and it will form oxyhemoglobin. So hemoglobin, we all know, it is an iron containing pigment which can carry oxygen and it is present in the RBC, red blood corpuscles. So 97% of oxygen is carried by RBC and that is in the form of combined form, that is combined with hemoglobin in the form of oxyhemoglobin. The remaining 3% is transported in the dissolved state in the plasma. So only two methods only have to learn. Then the next one, it is carbon dioxide transportation, and it is here the equation we have given. Hemoglobin, that is each hemoglobin molecule, again I will show you the structure, will combine with consists of 4 polypeptide. Each hemoglobin molecule will consist of 4 hemoglobin chain which is made up of polypeptide. So each polypeptide chain which is a globin, which will be attached to heme part of that one, will be attached to a globin, and each globin can combine with one molecule of oxygen. So here 4 heme chain or polypeptide chain of hemoglobin can combine with 4 molecules of oxygen and they can form oxyhemoglobin. So from the lung, when it is surrounded by, alveolus is surrounded by blood, within the blood the hemoglobin will bind, because lung it is more amount of oxygen, in the blood less amount of oxygen. So from oxygen from the lungs, it will enter from the lungs to the blood vessels, it will enter. Within that blood it will combine with hemoglobin and forms the oxyhemoglobin. The other one, just of course 3%, it is dissolved in plasma. Then the second second type method is, that is the transport of carbon dioxide in the blood. Here the carbon dioxide can take 3 different methods. The exchange is in different way. That is, the first one, it is the transport is 23% of the carbon dioxide is transported by combining with hemoglobin itself, that is in the RBC. So 23% is in the RBC, that too combining with hemoglobin. That component is called as, I haven't mentioned here, carbaminohemoglobin. Carbaminohemoglobin. Okay, 23% is in the form of carbaminohemoglobin. Why it is called as carbamino? It is carbon dioxide is combined with amino group of the hemoglobin. Amino group means globin is a protein and amino acid, the subunits of protein is amino acid. So it is combined with amino group of hemoglobin and forms carbaminohemoglobin. The remaining, again the second one, 70% of the carbon dioxide is transported as bicarbonates, either in the form of sodium bicarbonate or in the form of potassium bicarbonate. How it is transported means, first it will enter into the RBC, and inside the RBC, that is carbon dioxide will combine with water in the presence of a particular type of enzyme, which is the fastest enzyme that is present in RBC. So carbonic anhydrase, the name is carbonic anhydrase, which is fastest enzyme, and it can mediate this reaction very fast. Okay, so carbon dioxide combines with water and forms carbonic acid, and in the presence of carbonic anhydrase itself, again it will split into H2CO3, will split into HCO3 minus plus H plus. So this is from tissues to the from tissues to the blood. Okay, forward direction is from tissues, it is bidirectional reaction only. When it reaches in the near the tissue lungs, that is deoxygenated blood, when it is reaching the lungs, from the blood to the lungs it will return in this way. That is, this is from tissues to the blood. Okay, this upward direction is carbon dioxide from the tissues will combine with water and it will diffuse into it will form a bicarbonate ion, and that is carbon dioxide diffuse into the blood, water in the blood, okay, water in the blood, and it will enter into the RBC. RBC contain carbonic anhydrase, and it is mediated the combination, that is combining of carbon dioxide with water, and mediate the formation of carbonic acid within the RBC itself. And inside the RBC again it will split up into bicarbonate ions and H plus ions. This bicarbonate, either it will combine with sodium or with potassium, and in that ionic form it will diffuse into, from the RBC it will diffuse into the plasma, and along with the plasma it will be returned back into the tissues, into the lungs. When it reaches the lungs, this again sodium bicarbonate or potassium bicarbonate will dissociate, and this bicarbonate ions will combine with hydrogen and they will form carbonic acid. Again carbonic acid will split up into carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide will release as the free gas. This carbon dioxide only diffuse from blood to the lungs, and from the lungs it will go out to the atmosphere. So in that way 70% is transported in the form of bicarbonate ions, which is mediated by the through the RBC, then into the plasma, and the enzyme which plays very important role in that is carbonic anhydrase. The last 7% is dissolved in plasma. Okay, so this part is very, very important, oxygen transport as well as the carbon dioxide transport. So this is a brief description of hemoglobin chain. As I said before, hemoglobin molecule is made up of 4 hemoglobin polypeptide chain, that is called as hemoglobin chain. And out of that 4 chain, 2 is coming under one category, that is called as alpha chain, and 2 beta chain. So one hemoglobin molecule itself consists of 4 polypeptide chain, 2 alpha and 2 beta. We need not go further into that one. And each hemoglobin chain will contain a heme part. Heme part means an ion containing hydrocarbon ring-like structure. Porphyrin ring we will say. Each ring again consists of pyrrole ring. This is one pyrrole ring. That means 4 sides there is carbon, and on the centermost region there is a nitrogen. So this also carbon, this also carbon, this also carbon, this also carbon, and then nitrogen. Like that, one A chain, A ring, B ring, C ring, and D ring. That is interconnected by CH groups. So 4 pyrrole ring. In the center there is iron group, and hold together we will call it as porphyrin ring. We need not go deep into that one, but even then just I am giving you an idea, because iron is an important component for the proper formation of hemoglobin. And to that chain only this is heme alone, okay, iron containing heme part, and that is combined to a protein part that is called as globin. So heme plus globin forms a hemoglobin chain. Like that, how many chains? 4 hemoglobin chain forms 1 hemoglobin molecule. Okay, 4 hemoglobin chain forms 1 hemoglobin molecule. And in that hemoglobin chain, each hemoglobin chain can combine with 1 molecule of oxygen. So since 4 chains are there, 4 molecules of oxygen can be carried by 1 molecule of hemoglobin. I hope that part is clear. So this, in that form only, oxygen, 97% of oxygen will be combined with the hemoglobin. So this next topic we are going into the detail is oxygen dissociation curve. So oxygen is having very high affinity to bind with hemoglobin and can form oxyhemoglobin. So whenever partial pressure of oxygen is more, then immediately it will bind with the hemoglobin. But when we consider the affinity of hemoglobin, hemoglobin is having more affinity to bind with carbon dioxide. Then very high affinity is for carbon monoxide, 200 times more the affinity for carbon monoxide, which is poisonous only. But normally in the atmosphere, amount of carbon dioxide naturally it will be less. Then the next affinity is for carbon dioxide, then only oxygen, and very less affinity for nitrogen. So oxygen, hemoglobin will show affinity to bind with the oxygen whenever the percentage of oxygen or the partial pressure of oxygen is very high. Hemoglobin can combine with oxygen. So here it's a graphical representation. The oxygen dissociation curve is a graphical representation which depicts the saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen against the partial pressure of oxygen. Saturation of hemoglobin, that means the in our body how many hemoglobins are there, how much percentage of the hemoglobin can bind with oxygen. So around 97% of the hemoglobin can bind with oxygen if the partial pressure of oxygen is very high. So where the partial pressure of oxygen will be very high? As a result of intake of oxygen, breathing, inhalation. At the time of inhalation, more oxygen rich air will enter inside the lungs. So immediately surrounding the alveolus, the blood vessels will be there. So in the lung, the oxygen is very high. So partial pressure of oxygen is very high. Automatically, oxygen will diffuse into the hemoglobin, into the blood. There again, oxygen percentage is very high. Immediately, hemoglobin will bind with the oxygen. So when fully saturated, each gram of hemoglobin can combine with nearly 1 gram in an approximately in a healthy person per 100 ml of blood. Nearly 12 to 16 grams of hemoglobin can be present in a healthy person. Okay, so that is called as, that is a normal range of hemoglobin in a healthy person. If that amount is less than that, means we will call it as anemia. Anemia means oxygen carrying capacity of the RBC or hemoglobin will be less. And normally in each and every person, if 12 to 16 grams of hemoglobin is there, means 1 gram of hemoglobin can carry approximately 1.34 ml of oxygen per 100 ml. Okay, 1 gram of hemoglobin can carry 1.34 ml of oxygen per 100 ml. And here this binding of hemoglobin with the oxygen depends upon 3 factors. That is very important. It is the oxygen will combine with the hemoglobin in 3 conditions whenever there is increase in H plus ion. That means automatically low pH, and increase in partial pressure of carbon dioxide, as well as increase in temperature, which affects the curve. So whenever these 3 factors, increase in H plus ions, increase in carbon dioxide tension or partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and increase in temperature. So whenever there is carbon dioxide is more, then the oxygen, oxyhemoglobin, will dissociate into hemoglobin and oxygen. That means within the tissue, as a result of cellular respiration, within the tissue as a result of cellular respiration, carbon dioxide tension will be more, and there within the tissue H plus ions also will be more, and as a result of cellular respiration, it is a chemical reaction, and of course the temperature also will be more, heat energy will be produced. So heat also will increase, temperature also will increase, carbon dioxide also will be increased, and H plus ions also will be more in the tissues. That time the blood will carry the oxyhemoglobin, and the hemoglobin will deliver oxygen into the tissues. Dissociation. Oxygen will dissociate from the hemoglobin into the tissues, and increase in the concentration decreases the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. That means whenever carbon dioxide is more, hemoglobin will combine with carbon dioxide. That is what I said, affinity of hemoglobin compared to oxygen. Hemoglobin, if carbon dioxide is more, means hemoglobin will combine with carbon dioxide, and instead of that carbon monoxide is there, means it will show more affinity towards carbon monoxide. That is why we are raising our voice against pollution. If air contain more amount of carbon monoxide, then they will form another component carboxyhemoglobin, which is toxic, which can cause damage to our lungs and other body system. So more affinity wise, hemoglobin is showing more affinity, that is 200 times towards carbon monoxide, then nearly 25 times towards carbon dioxide. Then comes the oxygen, very less or negligible affinity only to the nitrogen. Okay, so oxygen will hemoglobin dissociate, oxyhemoglobin will dissociate, or hemoglobin which carry oxygen will be unloaded to the tissues. In return, which one it will take? Carbon dioxide will be taken. Now we'll move on to the next one. So this is a graphical representation. So when you plot the saturation of hemoglobin against the pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of oxygen, you will get a sigmoid curve. That means in the lower region, we can see the partial pressure of oxygen is less. Whenever the partial pressure of oxygen is less, what will be the result? The oxygen will keep on oxygenated or reduced blood returning, that is it will hemoglobin that is partial pressure of oxygen is less, means hemoglobin will bind. Okay, hemoglobin will bind, that means carbon dioxide, partial pressure of oxygen is less means carbon dioxide will be more. So the hemoglobin will gradually dissociation only. We can say this one is in tissues, the oxyhemoglobin will dissociate. And whenever acid goes to the lungs, so this is in the tissues, means tissues, oxygen, partial pressure of oxygen will be less. So the from blood, the oxyhemoglobin will deliver oxygen into the tissues, But when it goes to the lungs, in the lungs the partial pressure of oxygen is very high, whereas in the blood partial pressure of oxygen is very less. So here immediately, here more partial pressure, hemoglobin in the capillary will take oxygen from the lungs and they form oxyhemoglobin. So here if it is dissociation of hemoglobin, oxyhemoglobin into oxygen and hemoglobin, means here it is binding. So in the tissues the oxygen will be unloaded, and in the lungs the oxygen will be loaded by the lungs. So this curve, sigmoid curves, it is slow, binding of oxygen, hemoglobin, dissociation of oxygen will be, hemoglobin will be slow, but when it reaches to the lung, to the dissociation means binding of oxygen with the hemoglobin, when it reaches to the lung, the binding affinity of hemoglobin will be increased, and hemoglobin will bind with oxygen, and approximately around 120, 140 and all, you can see approximately 97% of the blood will be, or hemoglobin will be saturated with high amount of oxygen in the lungs. Okay, this one is in the tissues and here it is lungs. In the tissues they unload, and in the lungs they will load. The hemoglobin can combine with oxygen. So this graphical representation is called as oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, or simply we will say oxygen dissociation curve, which will give a sigmoid curve. So it is plotted against saturation of hemoglobin against the partial pressure of oxygen. With this we come into the conclusion of this second part. In the third part we will discuss about we will discuss about the next topic, that is regulation of respiration. Okay, regulation of respiration. With that, and very few disorders only we have to learn. With that we will come into a conclusion of this respiration, and one more session I may take for explanation of kingdom, that is biological classification up to protista. So you can expect at least one. If time is there, means 2 more modules will be there, minimum 1 will be there. Okay, thank you very much. Good night everyone.